Hi guys, this training is on motivating operations. I'm going to try not to dive too deep into this because it's a pretty comprehensive and intense principle, and there's a lot that goes into it. But I'll just talk a little bit about what it is and how it could be relevant to you at home. So a motivating operation is something that affects or changes the value of a reinforcer. So in our other training on reinforcement, we talked about how the key factor in reinforcement is that it should increase a behavior. But sometimes you might think you have this awesome thing that your child really likes and it's not increasing the behavior. So that tells us that we don't have a true reinforcer. Not necessarily that, but we could potentially look at changing the value of the reinforcer to make it reinforcing. So with that comes two principles that I feel like would be relevant to you, and they're deprivation and satiation. So deprivation is depriving a child of access to an item, and satiation is overusing the item to the point where it decreases its value. So an example would be, for me, say I was using cookies as a reinforcer for exercising. If I have just eaten a huge Thanksgiving feast, it might not be reinforcing to me to have a cookie. So the exercise to me isn't worth it. So you can see there that in that example, the Thanksgiving feast would have satiated me to the point where the cookie is not an effective reinforcer in that moment. So that would be an example of satiation. So me having a full 5-course meal makes the cookie lose its reinforcing value. With the opposite, if I'm starving, the cookie may seem like the end-all, be-all, best reinforcer in the world. So depending on, what factors have happened. So like in this state, I haven't had a Thanksgiving feast. So now I'm like, all right, I'm going to exercise because I really want that cookie. So that's an example of deprivation because I deprived myself basically of food to establish that as a motivating operation to make the cookie more valuable to reinforce my behavior that I'm looking to increase. So you can see there in those two examples that though, the state of whatever it is, the surrounding environmental factors, how they can affect how valuable reinforcement is. So you may hear me say when choosing a reinforcer, especially for those really, really difficult skills like toilet training, for example, is a really tough one. And the first thing I always ask is, what's the end-all, be-all reinforcer for your child? And a common response is an iPad, which great, but you have to think about your life, and is it realistic for you to withhold the iPad? Because especially for something like toilet training, if you're following a schedule once every hour and they're peeing and they're successful, they're already getting access to the iPad every hour. So what's their motivation to hold out for toileting if they're getting it anyway? So it kind of helps make it more valuable by, using the iPad only for toilet training. And I know, especially during a quarantine, personally, like I would be like, absolutely not. I can't withhold that. I have to make dinner, So, I know it's realistic, but we also want to look at there's got to be something else. And maybe it's something that you're not thrilled about them having, but for purposes of, reducing this challenging behavior, getting them toilet trained, or doing whatever it is you need to do to, find those valuable reinforcers. Like I know a lot of people aren't a fan of candy. I personally am not either. But an example for me at home was my daughter was not sleeping through the night. So we got her one of those okay to wake clocks that turn green when it's time, like when it's an appropriate time for you to get out of bed. And when she did that, she got candy. And those are things like first thing in the morning, like, all right, she's eating candy for breakfast. But to me, like that trumped her not sleeping through the night. And I mean, it was better for everyone because I mean, her demeanor was better. Everything was better, despite her having candy first thing in the morning. But I think those things are important to think about. But also looking at how you can manipulate the value. And again, I mean, disclaimer, you don't want to withhold actual food. You don't want to withhold any personal needs or things like that. Just make sure it's something that's realistic for you and your family. And like I said, the withholding thing is something that just makes that reinforcer more valuable for the child. And also keep in mind satiation, which like I said, is that the opposite of that. If a child's getting too much access to it, you may want to consider, thinning your reinforcement schedule. So how often you're giving it to them, or changing up your reinforcer. And that's it. Thank you.